This is Jeff Finkle, and you're listening to the Matt Balaker podcast.
Hello, fine people out there. Thank you once again for tuning in to the Matt Balaker podcast. It gives me a purpose, it makes my day, and it gives me that warm, fuzzy feeling inside. And if it's been a little while, please tell a friend, tell an acquaintance to like, subscribe, and share. You guys are in for a treat because today's guest is fantastic. He's an angel investor, venture capitalist, startup coach, writer, pitch competition judge, an all-around wonderful human being. Please join me in welcoming Jeffrey Finkle to the program. How you doing, Jeffrey?
I'm doing well, Matt. Thank you for that really, really kind intro.
Well, I like to bring you up, and then there's nowhere to go but down. So it should be a fun ride. No, but I'm a youth basketball coach. I don't want to brag too much, Jeffrey, but we have two kids in second and fourth grade, and I'm coaching both of them, and we're about 500. So I know a little bit about basketball coaching. I'm no expert, but what is the role of a startup coach? I'm very curious.
Wow. A startup coach is probably 50% strategist and 50% therapist. Most startup CEOs haven't been there before. I mean, certainly there are a great number of second and third time founders, but the vast majority are first time. And then the vast majority that need coaching are first time. And it's really hard in the social circles for them to get the kind of support that they need, to understand maybe a difficult conversation with somebody on their board of directors, right? Or to understand, an intricate personnel issue. Mm-hmm. And it's very different than if they were talking to, an HR executive for a large company. So it can be really lonely. And so I think a lot of it is just a way to express, to get out what you're thinking, and then to get some real solutions that somebody who has a broader data set can bring to them. But that's really what it's all about. I mean, I think coaching is given in a variety of different formats, whether it's a standing meeting or call when you need. Much of what I've done in the past has been more of a standing meeting. But that's really, what it is. You're somebody who can answer very specific questions: how to construct a cap table, how to do something very, very specific. Is it better to let somebody go on a Friday or a Monday? But more importantly, somebody who can just understand and empathize.
So you're sort of a confidant with the
a consigliere, a confidant.
A consigliere, a confidant. And how did this relationship begin? Like, is it a formal, I'm a coach, you're a player, or does it come about more organically? Like, share with us.
Well, the majority, I'd say not the majority, but about half of mine have been just sort of casual, friend of a friend, often the son of a friend who's, on a startup journey. When I did this practice more formally a number of years ago, I had a startup, brought a startup consulting business that I did in partnership with a venture law firm. And, they were really building a practice around coaching. So that was a little bit more of a formal relationship.
Now, when you're coaching, is it just for fun? Are you compensated for your service, or is it because you're an investor and you want to see handsome returns for the capital you put out? How does that work?
It's both, but oftentimes companies don't have cash to pay, so it's often for options, and sometimes it's contingent on a raise. But I think as this discipline has professionalized, it's become for payment rather than for sort of contribution back.
Yeah, I know on LinkedIn, the idea of like personal coaching has really grown the last, call it 5 to 10 years. So it makes sense. Like a natural extension would be for startups. And Jeffrey, you mentioned, helping kind of navigate prickly situations, like maybe dealing with a member of the board of directors. What are some common challenges that startup entrepreneurs face that you help guide them through?
Oh boy, the list is long. My financing is not coming together. What do I do? If I shrink, I'm going to hurt morale. What do I share? What's the method for sharing? I am not going to get a raise done. How do I recalibrate my plan? I think in difficult capital markets, which we are in now, and certainly in the cannabis industry where I've been more focused, we've been in really a depressed capital markets environment for a year and a half. There's a lot of that. So it's recalibrating the plan. Again, I say it, but I really mean this, that sometimes it's just somebody to articulate it to and get it off your chest. Oftentimes, entrepreneurs kind of know what to do. They actually their instincts are kind of okay, but they need to make sure it's not just in their head.
That's
It's not once, it's sort of like, even if you're married and there's bad news, you want to share it with your wife, it's sort of off your burden a little bit. It's got an element of that, just so the act of sharing and hearing it and getting validation is important. But a lot of those things still are practical.
Yeah, right? I mean, just being able to get something off your chest, it's sort of like a good marriage. It doubles the joy and halves the disappointment. And I think you're extending that to the corporate world.
I think so, but I mean, I don't want to just say that that's only it. There's a lot of practical stuff, but
yeah. So is it better to fire on a Friday or a Monday?
Monday.
Why?
2 reasons. The poor person being let go doesn't have to obsess all weekend when they can't help themselves. They can't network. They can't go to unemployment. Right? So Monday allows them to be in action. And that's better for the healing process.
That's important. I remember being let go for a job that was not a good fit several years ago. And it was on a Tuesday. And by Wednesday, I was making phone calls and I had some traction, and it just felt so much better than the desperation of what am I going to do now? And
imagine if that was Friday at 5 p.m.
Yeah, I might be on a bender that I'm just now finishing. So I'm glad it wasn't on 5 p.m. My liver is much better off. So you are a judge at the pitch competition. How did that start?
Well, for the last 12 years, I've been involved in a variety of a very unique style of venture fund. Not to get too technical with you, but it's what's called a member managed venture fund. I was involved in 2 in the tech space and 1 in the cannabis space. And it's a way in which limited partners, right? They're the ones that invest into venture funds, and the general partners are the one that run it, right? And look at the companies and decide what to do and then manage it. But in a member managed fund, the LPs and the GPs are one and the same. So they're involved, they listen to the pitches, they decide how the fund is run and in which companies the fund invests. So within that backdrop, you're listening to companies all day long, right? And so they're incoming all day long, but you have formal meetings twice a month where companies present, and then there's a judging process, a scoring process, and you decide who to invite back again or go into a due diligence process. So just doing that for so long I mean, literally hours of listening to companies pitch, giving them feedback, and making a decision based on what we've heard. I think that's kind of how that got started. And then once I got good at that, I was asked to judge a variety of unrelated pitch competitions, whether they be online or whether they be at different events around the New York metropolitan area.
Very, very cool. I remember, gosh, I think this was, call it 2008, maybe 2007. Please don't quote me exactly on this, but I had a phone call with someone named Kevin Harrington, and he was talking about this television show he was going to be working on where entrepreneurs come in and they pitch. And, I was in my early 30s, so I knew everything. And I remember thinking to myself, like, that's kind of what I do. Like, who'd want to watch that? Like, that's my job. It's fun for me, but I can't imagine an audience. And I think Shark Tank is on its 15th season, so shows what I know about television.
Not only that's a cultural phenomenon. By the way, I would just say it. A lot of the people who are attracted to become part of a member managed fund, somebody who doesn't get to do this normally, they might be an insurance executive or a marketing research guy. It's the Shark Tank effect. They visualize themselves being, Damon John or Mr. Wonderful or somebody on the cast because they're now in this seat listening and giving critique.
Yeah,
so that's just been a cultural phenomenon.
It's a cultural phenomenon. It's an interesting dynamic that people tune in by the millions to watch pitches. But I mean, what's the reality though? Like, because when I've done this, it's not very much like Shark Tank at all. You take a lot longer to make decisions. What's the real life?
First of all, the pitch, what happens in a Shark Tank pitch is not what happens in real life. That is a television show, right? No one's going to hear 5 things and say, I'll give you $1 million for 20% of your company. That's not how it works. These are much more thoughtful, complete presentations than what you see there. That is made for television. And what I do understand is in the backdrop, there's much deeper consultations that have gone on, but that's what's shown to the public. This is not what it's like. So usually in these things, companies present for about 8 or 9 minutes. They go through a deck, which can have anywhere from 8 to 15 slides. Again, it's not the number of slides, it's the number of points that your slides make. Sometimes 3 or 4 quick slides make 1 point. So I'm not personally married to number of slides. I'm married to number of points that are made. You can build to it with many. That's usually 8 or 9 minutes. And then there's usually, at least the way we do it, another 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A.
Okay, so you mentioned the importance of points. So it's not a matter of pages, it's a matter of points. What are some of the most important points in your opinion?
Okay. First thing I'm going to say to you is if you interview 10 people and ask them that question, you'll get at least 8 different answers. So I'm going to tell you what works for me.
Sounds good.
Which speaks to the way I need to hear it. Okay? So most people start with problem or unmet need, then solution. I like to elongate that a little bit at the beginning. What I like to do is either the problem or the unmet need. Right? Now think about it. I'm investor. I got it. I hear it. I feel it. Then the next thing that I'm probably thinking of is, well, what's the consequence of that need not being met? Like, who cares? Like, I might get it, but my brain goes to, okay, what's the consequence? Is it economic? Is somebody going to lose a lot of money? Is somebody going to lose a lot of productivity or time? What's the consequence? So I want to hear that next. I want to hear problem or unmet need, consequence of it not being solved, and I will tell you, it's better if it is economic. The next thing I think about, okay, the problem's real. If the consequence is great, well, somebody must have tried this before, right? Are you the only one that figured this out? Because that would be weird. So the next thing I want to hear is the way in which the problem has been tried to be solved, but failed. Now I am set up to hear the solution.
I like
If
that.
you go to problem to solution and then it works and you don't skip those steps, and sometimes if you're doing a 4-minute pitch, you might have to forgo that. But those are the questions I believe that are legacy hanging in the mind of the listener. Right?
It's all, yeah. I like that.
So
It's
for
also,
me, that part of the story and what I've seen is that if you nail that, certainly it has to be a big problem. It has to be an economic, but if you nail those messages, you eliminate that chin scratch. Now somebody's dialed in. Now they're learning the next parts, and it depends. Market size could be next, but it could be traction next. Because the next time owner knows, okay, is this just an idea? Oh, wait a minute, you've been out 2 years and you're growing 30% month over month, and your unit economics are improving. I want to hear that first. If you don't have that, I want to hear size. Like, okay, I get it. Big problem space, economic consequence. Everyone's failed by trying it this way. You have a novel solution. How big is it? Is this a $20 million market or a $10 billion market? So once you've nailed those 3 things, then there's some optionality into what comes next, depending on how far along the company is.
I like that. That lays it out very logically. So I see why you're a good coach, and obviously you're an experienced investor. Where did this drive come from? Like, when did you realize you had that kind of investor bug inside you?
I spent the first, excuse me, 18 years of my career as an operating executive in the software industry. And through that time, I was sort of switching. So I started in product management. In product management, you're really like the CEO of your own company. You're responsible for the product. You're responsible for training the sales staff on the product. You're responsible for understanding customer requirements and feeding it back into the product, so that you're like a mini CEO of a product. I did that. I became the general manager of an operating division. But then I also spent about maybe just under half of that 18 years on the corporate M&A side, where I was acquiring companies on behalf of a software company. So I was always either on the deal side or the management creation side. And I liked both. And whenever I spent too long on one, I craved the other. If I was only doing deals and I couldn't own anything, I got antsy. If I was only owning things that couldn't be creative and do deals, I got antsy. So the obvious next step for me, understanding those 2 disciplines, was venture capital, because I could do both. I could invest and understand and then stay aboard, at least in an advisory capacity or on the board of directors, to help. And so that was the next step. So after 18 years, I got recruited out to start a venture capital fund, and I just felt it was the perfect fit. And this was certainly during the first .com bust. So again, probably the best time in the world to start a fund, and then we invested into the carnage. So I'm kind of used to those cycles.
There was blood on the street, and you're making deals.
There's blood on the street for sure. So I think that's what happened, and I think also because maybe have some nurturing qualities and I communicate well, it became a pretty good fit.
Yeah, I mean, you communicate very, very well, but it takes more than just good communication skill to kind of jump ship from the corporate position to venture capital. You know, one is a lot more risk averse than the other. What was that like when you actually left the software company and became a fund manager?
Well, the risk was, could we raise the fund? I mean, it was $115 million fund, and we had 30 million committed from an anchor. So we had a long way to go. I mean, it would have been viable if we only got to 50. We ended up exceeding our expectations. I was just very ready. I was young enough. And, here's the thing. This is why I also tell a lot of young entrepreneurs that I coach. If you understand, if you're contemplating a career change, the first question you ask yourself is, if it doesn't work out after 2 years, can I pretty much come in and pick up where I left off? Sort of one calibrating thing you ask yourself. The second thing is do I understand 20%, 50%, 80%, or 100% of how to do the next step. The answer is 20%. I would say probably don't do it. If it's 50%, I say probably don't do it, but if you're special, maybe do it. If you're 80%, absolutely do it. If you're 100%, you've waited too long. So it's okay to not know everything when you take the next step. You do need to know enough, a good amount, and then be confident in yourself that you'll learn the rest and fill in. Sometimes people wait too long. They wait to, well, there's 3 things out of 600 things I don't know. That to me is not the right approach.
Okay, so that's helpful. So now that you've transitioned to this new role, what are some of the big takeaways or some of the big learning experiences that you had to undertake when you were a fund manager?
A few things. One, you really don't know that much. You don't know how to operate them businesses better than the companies you invest in. I mean, maybe if you're not a very good investor, that could be true, but more often that's not the case. They know what they're doing, and I often, I think a certain way. I'm a logical, sort of progressive thinker. And sometimes I can't see a consumer opportunity, or let's say a customer opportunity that's being pitched to me, because it doesn't make sense to me logically, but they have traction. And so and I can see the numbers. In other words, it's not like 3 clients that are buying in your uncle's best friend. There's traction across a wide set of diverse, unaffiliated clients. And so the thing that you have to learn is you're not right. Listen to what the data is telling you. If there's traction, but it doesn't make sense for you, I can think of 2 situations, probably 2 of the, I'm not going to mention who they are, of the better companies I've invested in that had that happen. And I could give you 10 reasons why I didn't want to fund either of them. And I didn't get it, but it was clearly working. So I'd say that's a big takeaway, which is listen to the data. Don't, go with your gut, but don't go with your preconceived ideas about what might be logical the way that you see it at the moment.
Yeah, because the moment's going to be different, in 18, 24 months and 5 years. And earlier, Jeffrey, I mentioned that I would not have invested in Shark Tank. It wasn't approached to me as an investment. We were just talking, but in a sense, that was one that got away. It was a huge hit. What are some that got away for you? You don't have to name specific companies if you don't want, but like, if I would have had a chance to do this over again, I would have put my money on.
Oh man, this is almost painful to say. And I've told the story a lot of times without the company. It was so long ago, you probably wouldn't even know who they are. It was a company that when we started our fund, I would say most of the seed companies that we were investing in, the valuations were $7 to $8 million, and they were raising $2 to $3 million. They were going to be 10 million posts. It was sort of the mean range for real good seed companies that had a product. This one company, and we were a New York Metro fund, which meant that our primary focus was the tri-state area. Came across a company in Tampa, Florida. It was run by a very young guy who had no experience. He had one good strategic partnership with a very large technology distributor. And it was $27 million pre-money. It's almost 3 times what we would normally pay. Now, there were a lot of good reasons to do this deal, but the check boxes that I saw were inexperienced entrepreneur, not really a lot of customer traction, valuation through the roof. There's no way to justify it. and it's out of region. At the time, my sister was living in Tampa, and so there was this temptation to say, well, if we do invest, I could be on the board, I could visit a lot, and that would be really cool. So I had that as a wall because I wanted to overcorrect for that.
Mm-hmm.
But that wasn't really the big part of the decision tree. But for all of those other reasons that I said, we decided not to go forward. So here's the thing. 14 months later, that company that would have stood, and maybe they were raising $5 million, maybe would have stood $32 million post-money.
Mm-hmm.
14 months later, can you guess what they sold for?
$35 million?
$1.3 billion. And the consideration for that acquisition was stock in the acquiring company, which was public.
Okay.
And I tracked it for the 13 months, which would have been our lockup,
Mm-hmm.
and the price held. So my fund that would have returned my fund 4 times, and I would have made godly sums of money early in my career.
You'd be such a genius too. Yeah.
Well, so here's the way I think about it. I made the wrong decision ultimately for the right reasons.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's sort of like, what was it? Was it the 2007 Super Bowl? I think when the Patriots were undefeated. And
I was at that Super Bowl.
Okay.
I'm a lifelong Patriot fan because I'm from Boston. So that's just hearing those words is painful, but I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, I'm just here to bring pain and despair to you because you're being so nice to be on my program. No, but I would contend that the smart bet was still bet on the Patriots. They lost, there was that miraculous helmet catch, but then you just tip your cap to the Giants and say, it wouldn't have been dumb to bet on the Patriots because all signs were pointing to a victory for them.
No doubt. And I think they were the better team if it wasn't for some crazy David Tyree helmet catch.
Exactly. So I'm sure that me saying that, Jeff, makes you feel so much better about missing out on $1 billion plus.
No, I can tell you this. That was a painful plane ride home with all New York fans.
Oh, God. I'm sorry you had to endure that, but things are a little different now. For those tuning in on the YouTube cast of this program, you'll see ArcView in the background. It's a group I've been familiar with for a while, but now you're part of them. You're part of an investment fund through there. Like how did this kind of marriage come about?
Well, yeah. So I was talking about these member managed funds. I started one in cannabis outside of ArcView.
Okay.
And then in 2020 early, I merged it with ArcView to create a subsidiary called ArcView Ventures, which was going to focus, sort of be the principal investing arm of ArcView. And then a year and a half later, I became CEO of the ArcView Group. But just for your listeners, ArcView is a services firm servicing the cannabis industry. We have a broker-dealer group, we have a venture group, we have a consulting group, and we produce live events and also digital events, thought leadership, and investor conferences to sort of educate the world and bring investors and entrepreneurs and operators together.
Very cool. It's grown so much. I remember, about 12 years ago, having a call with Troy Dayton and Steve D'Angelo, and at the time it was the first one out there, but it was essentially like a club where people would present. Now it's gotten so institutionalized.
Well, in those early days, I think the ArcView investment summits were 25 people around a conference table at a law firm, and then they grew to be 500-600 person events. The 2.5 day events at venues and hotels all around the country.
It's grown, it's matured, and we've interviewed your colleague Matt Hawkins, who's a great person.
That's great.
A thought leader. Probably one of the foremost investors in legal cannabis in America. Obviously, he's intelligent, he's persuasive, but you had a lot of options. What what was his pitch? Like, why
Well,
cannabis?
it kind of came together at the same time. Right when Hawk's firm was investing in ArcView, and they are ArcView's lead investor, was the time where they had the vision to take this great brand that was a credible conference producer, that was well known, and create these business units such that they could benefit from the transactions. Think about it. Probably some $350 million found its way to over 250 companies facilitated at these ArcView investor summits. But ArcView didn't really benefit because they were a conference producer. They sold sponsorship and they sold, a membership so you could come to the events. But all of these transactions was making people wealthy. So Hawk and his partners thought it was a good idea to fund ArcView and help build these business units such that they could benefit from all the great work and all the financings that they were helping to create. So that was the idea. I thought it was a great idea. I was looking for a bigger platform to grow an asset management business. We had this one fund. I thought we could put together a much larger seed fund. And so, and once I met Hawk and his partners, I thought we just sort of were of one mind pretty quickly, just in the way we viewed the world. So it was easy for me to say, this is a good place to bring this property and be part of its evolution.
Nice. And, I'm interested, how do you view the world? I mean, what did that you guys kind of came to terms on, like philosophically?
Well, I think for me, it was an endorsement of the notion that brand was created and that we need to create businesses that can benefit from all that the brand was creating, meaning participating in the transactions. And that cannabis at the time, what was that, the $9 billion a year? Still, again, one of the biggest differences in the cannabis industry than, say, the tech industry, when I was investing in 2000 into the infrastructure layer of the web, we were building the pipes, right? There was digital media didn't exist, right? There was no applications. We were building the pipes and hoping that businesses would emerge. In 2008, at the, sort of the Web 2.0, we were building platforms for dual communication, Web 2.0, social media, right? Ways, Reddit, Yelp, ways in which the web wasn't a publishing medium, but it was a two-way communication vehicle where business could be run. But those businesses didn't exist. Cannabis is different. As you know, it's probably $100 billion North America of cannabis weed being transacted. And only now 19 billion of that has transitioned to the legal market. So demand exists. So the investment opportunity is to play the transition. So that didn't exist before. So ArcView's thesis of taking this great brand and benefiting at the transaction level, coupled with the fact that this at the time, and still today, I believe it, even though I know that we're in a very difficult capital markets environment and very difficult regulatory environment, the thesis still holds that this is a generational wealth creation opportunity, and it is a transition game from illicit to legal, and one that, if it's played effectively, can generate real substantial wealth.
Yeah, you brought up lots of good points there, but I want to highlight one just for a moment, Jeff. Why is the illicit market winning so much, in your opinion?
Well, it's winning for two reasons. There is an egregious tax infrastructure. Just look at the state of California. It used to be, I think, about a 50% delta from what you could buy in a legal dispensary. I'm talking about quality and tested product versus on the street. That gap is even widened. In some cases, it's 3 times as much. Some cases, twice as much. And that's created by all the layers of tax, all the layers of regulatory reporting and requirements that inure to the legal operators that don't inure to the illegal operators, creates a big price arbitrage. So that's the primary reason. It's supplemented by the fact that they're not cracking down on the illegal market. The illicit market is, allowed to pretty much grow with impunity. And that's got to stop. In New York, as you know, New York's just come online. There were 3 legal dispensaries open in Manhattan. I think the third one just opened. There are 1,400 illegal ones. Let that sit for a minute. Why? Because it's a $250 fine and they confiscate your product. So guess what? You buy more product tomorrow. You pay the fine. So they've got to get, so the answer is threefold. Regulatory progress, which is going to encourage the capital markets to invest so that better operators can grow. Fundamental change to the tax policy at the state level, and a crackdown on the illicit market.
So did you hear that, regulators? Write that down. Follow it, please. So,
or if you're not going to crack down on the illicit market, and some states are doing this, evolve them. Better yet, they created the industry. Evolve them to the legal market.
I like that, because I don't think any of us, especially in cannabis, want to live in a police state.
No, and I would tell you, it's different. Look, in California, and even in New York, there are real legacy growers operators that have, really built a good business. A lot of these 1,400 retailers are not those guys. They're just recent people who heard about legalization. They didn't build anything. They're just trying to create the arbitrage of being there first and trying to convince the public that they're legal operators. That's very different than, a family that's had a delivery service that, whose money helped the community grow and prosper. It's a little bit different.
Yeah, good point. So, real estate funds that deployed capital in 2006 through 2008, call it 2009, reap the rewards years later. Obviously, cannabis is in a compression when it comes to valuation right now. You're big in the industry. What words of wisdom do you have for skittish folks out there who are unsure if this is an opportunity for them or not?
Investors or entrepreneurs raising money? I think you mean investors.
I mean investors, but if you want to answer it, entrepreneurs.
Well, entrepreneurs should just get religion pretty quickly on what the valuations really are, and not be valuation sensitive, and get whatever they need, hunker down, cut costs, and get a path of profitability quicker. That's what they've got to do, rather than sort of looking at what SaaS multiples are in tech and trying to apply that to cannabis today, which is depressed. It's even coming down in tech, where cannabis is a smaller market. It's not going to have the same degree, at least if you're a tech provider, of growth than a tech company sort of selling their product to a horizontal market, rather than the vertical of cannabis. They need to get it quickly, or they're going to die on the vine, still looking for an unrealistic valuation. For investors coming in now, again, great fortunes were made in corrections, right? So to the extent that you can pick up assets that are, and there's going to be some failed assets coming, but you can pick up assets that are right priced, that have corrected, that's where great fortunes can be made. And I think that is 100% upon us. You're going to see a lot of that over the next 3 quarters.
Good points. And, you've had an impressive career. What are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned during that time?
I think I said it, you don't know that much.
The more you know, the less you know.
As much as you think you know, but you got to have good instincts, and you got to look at the data.
Good. Look at the data. Trust your instincts. Also look at valuations. What are you most proud of in terms of your career?
It's interesting. This just came up the other day. I've been, working 40 years, roughly. I've never been deposed. I've never been deposed. I've never been sued. In fact, I've never even had to do a settle. Although I'll tell you, in the last year, there were 3 very small settlements that a vendor relationship that went bad and a disagreement on an invoice that were very, very small that I settled. But up to that point, I've never been sued, never been deposed, never had a legal case, never had a settlement that was, much above small claims, right?
Wow.
That was settled just by me and the other party. I'm proud of the integrity that, that I've done business with throughout that period. That's one thing.
Yeah.
Because you put me on the spot. I hadn't really thought about it.
No,
I'm just saying
you answered that very well. Not being deposed in 4 decades. That's Hall of Fame. That's Hall of Fame material. Well, we're concluding, but I want to know, and the listeners want to know, what are you most optimistic about?
In terms of, I guess you're going to say any way you want to answer it.
No, you can do it business wise. Sometimes it helps to define the scope, or cannabis even.
Well, I'll say 2 things then. Again, I want people to remember that despite being in very difficult capital markets that we're in, as I've said, that we are still not done. That there's a long way to go. If you just look at that 100 million and 19 billion in, I would argue that some of that 19 billion obviously is medical, which didn't account in the original 100, which wasn't bought for medical. That there is still an enormous opportunity in front of us. And I will also tell people that there is capital in this industry. It's not in droves, and you got to work a lot harder to get it. Look, we had a conference in New York. We put 15 institutional investors on stage. They did a reverse pitch. They told the audience what their check sizes were, what they look for in entrepreneurs, how big their funds are. So it's out there. It's just not plentiful, and you got to work harder. So I'm optimistic that we're going to get through this. The other thing that I would say, which is kind of outside cannabis, but I've been spending some time on all these AI platforms like ChatGPT and some of the other ones. I'm optimistic on what that's going to do. I'm almost scared about what that's going to do. But it's just like when the calculator came out, and you didn't have to do division longhand on a piece of yellow paper. It freed your mind to do other things. And then when Excel came out, your cash flow model, you didn't have to take a pencil and an eraser and erase things when things changed. And that freed your mind to think more creatively. Now that ChatGPT and other AI platforms are emerging, there's going to be so many tasks that you would have had to do that will be done for you. And I'm wondering if how that's going to free your mind to think creatively and do more things that now you're unshackled to do. Yeah, I think so. I'm nervous and I'm excited.
Yeah, I mean the prospect of having free time excites a lot of people, but the reality could be pretty scary when you're like, "What do I do now?"
Yeah.
Well, you gave us lots to think about, Jeffrey. Where can people out there learn more about you and ArcView?
I guess look at my LinkedIn page. ArcView is www.arcview, ARCVIEW, for those that are not looking at the video here and can see the Zoom background, arcviewgroup.com.
arcviewgroup.com. We'll definitely put a link to it. Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Great, Matt. Thank you. And thank you. Thank you and thank your audience.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Matt Balaker podcast. To learn more, please check out mattbalaker.com and encourage your friends to like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate it.